It's about the analysis of the Zapruder film, and the only theory needed was elementary mechanics, and the only tools needed were a ruler and some melons and a rifle. And it is not of great scientific importance, but it bears on matters of great public importance. John Kennedy, President John Kennedy, was killed in the Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963. In 3 days, that'll be 48 years ago. He was the fourth president shot and killed. Lincoln. Names, I'm missing a little sleep, so I'm bad on names. Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy. We now have our 43rd person as president. That's 4 out of 43 killed. And it could have been worse. There have been about another dozen assassination attempts on presidents, and one was Reagan being shot. Also, an attack on Roosevelt when he was Franklin Roosevelt when he was president-elect, but not yet president. Left several people wounded and killed the mayor of Chicago. It's said that the mayor of Chicago, dying, said to Roosevelt, "I'm glad it was me and not you." And sad as that is, a whole lot of other people have reason to share the same sentiment. Kennedy was in, if I get away from this, let me know. Kennedy was in Texas for a number of political reasons, party reasons and so on, but practically every trip a president takes has as part of it to be seen by the citizens of that area, to remind them there is a president way off, and to get some television interviews maybe, or to maybe cut some ribbons, and in this case, as used to be the case more often, be in a motorcade so that the citizens could come out and see their president. And the route and the time of this motorcade were announced so that people could come out. And there was a limousine. In the front seat were Secret Service, one driving, the other riding, as they say, shotgun. In middle seats were Governor John Connally and his wife, and in the back seats were Jack and Jackie. And the, see, I got my arrow. They came in through here, moved around through here, and down through here. So, there. An open limousine traveling at 12 miles an hour. Mr. Zapruder, standing, I can't see what I'm doing here, the screen's bright. Well, let's see if I can do with this. I might want the laser in a minute. Mr. Zapruder standing there was good. You can act as my. You can be my pointer. Mr. Zapruder standing there took. Standing there took motion picture film of what happened, and if we didn't have that film, we'd know far less about what happened. These are frame numbers of the film, and where Louis thought the shots occurred. The first 2 shots where he deduced they occurred from examining the film, and we'll come back to that. It's not entirely convincing. But frame 313 of the film, there's no doubt about it, because at that frame, jets of blood and brain are blown out of the front of Kennedy's head. A few hours later, Lee Harvey Oswald, after shooting and killing a policeman, was arrested and in custody of Texas authorities, not federal authorities. He was questioned and did little to do but proclaim his innocence and ask for a lawyer. 2 days later, when he was being transferred from one jail to another through a crowded hall, a hall crowded with police and reporters and gangers on, he was shot and killed by Jack Ruby, the owner of a Dallas nightclub. There was, of course, a huge investigation of all this. Chief Justice Earl Warren headed a commission, and it had at its call all the powers of the United States government. And there was analysis, especially by the FBI, and tests made, reruns of various scenarios, Testimony from all kinds of people from all over. Every kind of connection that Oswald had was investigated. And after about a year, the commission came out with a 27-volume report giving all this information except some classified stuff, and its conclusions, which were that Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots from the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository building, and was the lone assassin. Well, there was already a lot of discussion. A lot of people didn't accept this simple story of the events. For one thing, how could they let the assassin of a U.S. president, how could they let him go through a hallway crowded with a bunch of people and get killed? And it wasn't that convenient for anybody who had any conspiratorial ideas about what might have happened. And there began to be, you could go down to a bookstore, there were all kinds of theories of what had happened. People crawled over all the evidence in the Warren Commission, and of course there were lots of contradictions of testimony and so on. 2 shots, 3 shots, 5 shots, 6 shots, things like that. Different people had different ideas about what had happened. There was the analysis was sometimes a little bit shabby. As we'll see, the FBI photo analysts could not do nearly as good a job, even with a 3-year head start over Kennedy, over Alvarez. So, what kind of conspiracies were there? Well, the bad guys, there were all kinds of bad guys. They could have been the Soviet Union because Oswald had exiled himself to Russia for a while before coming back. It could have been pro-Castro Cubans because of the Bay of Pigs invasion. It could have been anti-Castro Cubans because of the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion. It could have been people inside the U.S. government because they might have thought Kennedy was going soft on Vietnam. It could have been, there were a whole cast of things, gangsters, white racists, corrupt unions, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, and just about anybody you could think of who might not like Kennedy or his policies. And the Oliver Stone movie, JFK, makes a nice stew out of a number of those ingredients. So how did Louis come to be interested in this? Well, we can let him say, I think.
That made you interested enough to dip into the Warren report to begin analyzing the photos of that day?
Well, I think it was probably that I had lunch every day with a bunch of my graduate students who were keenly interested in the controversy that was going on at the time. For a while, I couldn't get very interested in it, but then when Life magazine republished the frames from the Zapruder movie, I spent an evening looking at them, and I found something that excited my interest.
In fact, he spent the Life magazine he mentions came 3 years after to mark the 3rd anniversary of the assassination. It came just before the Thanksgiving vacation. He spent practically the whole Thanksgiving 4 days looking at stuff. And by the time he was on the wrong track, they only published, Life magazine only showed about 25 of the frames from the film. But by Monday, when he could get into the Bolt library and see the Warren Commission and all the photographs, he was already hooked on it. And once Louis was hooked on a problem, he did not let loose of it lightly. So he wrote a paper eventually. The paper there's the title of the paper up there. Note that it was not published until 10 years after he started on this. Nearly all the work was done by 1970. There was a draft by 1970, but it was one of those things that sat around. And here is from the abstract. The author uses the tools of a physicist to draw some conclusions that escape the notice of the commission and its expert FBI photo interpreters. As I said, the FBI had a 3-year head start. And it turned out the Alvarez group had a perfect resource for Louis doing this. Louis was not interested in conspiratorial theories, and he wasn't interested in where the Warren Commission in 27 volumes had a lot of contradictions. But he had Paul Hoke, a graduate student in the group, and this is from the acknowledgments. Paul Hoke was for a long time my most knowledgeable and persistent critic. His vast store of knowledge concerning all aspects of the assassination was of great help in my position of knowing almost nothing of the literature critical of the Warren Commission's report. Paul is here. Yes, indeed. I had lunch with Paul Wednesday, so we've discussed this at some length. Here are the problems in the paper that Louis addressed, and I'm going to they're from the most important down, and if Bob cuts me off, I haven't anything to say about Forbes because it's not very important. But anyway, let's start from the top. The first thing is there was a big question about the motion of Kennedy's head. And the question was, does physics require that there was a shooter from in front as well as from in back? People were looking at this Zapruder film very carefully, looking for any kind of evidence that it didn't fit the simple story. And the answer Louis came to, that nobody else in 3 years had come to, actually a hunter in Texas had, but definitely not. The second thing, and I'll come back and talk about that at length. The second thing was the number and timing of the shots. The question was, are shots spaced closer together than could be, that's supposed to be fired, not read, from a single shot rifle? And the answer is, not according to Louis', not completely conclusive analysis. And what's at stake there? What's at stake there? If the shots are too close together, it couldn't have been Oswald because Oswald was shot with a single shot rifle, and the FBI determined it took at least 2.3 seconds to reload and fire again. So if you got shots a second apart, it's not going to work. The third was the frames per second rate of the camera. The question was, this rate such that time was compressed in validating the answer, the normal answer to 2? And the answer is no, and there really was very little controversy about that, but it's an interesting analysis. He found a clock in the film. And the fourth was the position of the car in every frame. The FBI had said, the question is, can this be determined in frames in which there are no permanently fixed background objects, like no light poles or no buildings or anything to see where the car is with respect to? And Louis showed, yes, you can use it even if there's just anything that's stationary for while the camera is panning, and such as a foot on the ground or the reflection from a piece of glass or something. And the FBI had said, no, they couldn't determine that. And Louis found that he could determine that and found a deceleration of the limousine. All right, so let's go to the first and most important of these things. This is from a book this is a figure from a book called 6 Seconds in Dallas, a micro-study of the Kennedy assassination by Josiah Thompson, who then was a philosophy professor at Haverford College, which is near Philadelphia, and later on was a private detective in San Francisco and lives, I believe, in Bolinas. This is the motion of, this is the full scale is 30 frames. Perhaps you can't see that. 30 frames full scale. The camera setting was 18 frames a second, so that's 1 2/3 second. Full scale, 1 2/3 second. This way, it's a foot across, 12 inches across. And this is, so the time goes up, and this is the motion of the head with respect to the top of the back seat as a function of time. And this way is forward in the car with respect to the seat, forward, or backward with respect to the seat. And what happens is at frame 13, the frame between frame 12 and 13, between there and there, the head is kicked forward by about 2 inches. But thereafter, it goes back in about a half a second. It looks slowly, but it's half a second, goes backward 7 seconds. 7 inches, excuse me. So, let's go back to the picture. This is the picture, and the shots are coming from behind, and the jets go out front. A shot from behind. So, and everybody knows that if you're shot from behind, your head will go forward. We've all seen mysteries and westerns in which somebody is blown away by a shot. And that the bullet lodges and kicks you, you take up the whole body, takes up the momentum of the bullet, and you're blown away. So the argument here of the people that found what they thought was a difficulty with the Warren Commission's conclusion was that there must have been a shot. Certainly there was a shot between 312 and 313 because of the jets. But after that, immediately after that, there must have been a shot from in front, driving the head backwards. I mean, that's simple physics, right? And the answer is wrong. because what people were thinking of is where the bullet lodges in what it hits and carries the momentum. So what Louis did was, I'm a little ahead of myself, what Louis did was look at the jets. He saw it wasn't a simple absorb the bullet and one single body traveling off afterwards. There were jets. So he made a simple model where the bullet strikes something and breaks into two bodies. And he did a back of an envelope physics 7A calculation and showed that what was left, if you have jets going out or something going out, then what can happen, not what necessarily has to happen, but what can happen is what's left can go backwards. It's a question of the bullet carries in a certain amount of momentum. If the jets carry out more momentum, then what's left has to go back toward the shooter. Now, he made a simple argument like this and showed his calculation around to other people, lots of people, including Paul Hoch. And everybody said, well, that's very interesting. That's a simple model of a complicated thing, and it shows that what maybe could happen, but it certainly doesn't make it seem probable. If you are an old two-body interaction physicist, you might think ellipse plots, which collapse to non-relativistically to circle plots, and the possibilities are various. So Louis said didn't like people not liking his ideas too much, so he went out and looking for experimental ways of proving it, and he got some friends and they went out and shot some melons. This is kind of muddy photography, but that's a wooden post there, and there's a melon on top, and the melon has been wrapped in fiber tape to simulate the tensile strength of the tensile strength of a skull, and it's about to be shot. So I'm going to go through this fast, and then I'm going to come back and show and tell slowly. Where did the bullet come from? Well, that's where we're going to go back and find out. Oh no. How do I get rid of that? I'm a Mac guy. I don't know what this stuff does. Oh, that's simple. Thank you. Okay, there is the melon. Okay, and it's about to be shot. And there are jets. This is frame 313. There are jets going that way. The shooter is over there. The question is, does the head have to go in the direction that the direction of the bullet's momentum? Or can it go opposite to the jets? In fact, the jets are probably what drive it back. And so we look at it more slowly, watch what happens to the melon. Up. I'm sorry. Here we go. I'm learning. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So what does this show? This shows that the motion of the president's head with respect to the seat cannot be used to prove there were two shooters. You can't prove that there weren't two shooters, but that motion cannot be used to prove that. Now, we've been asked by the people taking film to show or say something about how a great scientist goes about solving a problem, finding a problem, solving a problem, and how he presents his results. So here is how Louis went about with this problem. Oops, am I missing a slide? Not possible. Here we are. This is from the same paper, and this is on this section concerning the motion of Kennedy's head. Paul Hoch tried to interest me in one of the hottest and longest surviving controversies arising from the study of the Zapruder film. Paul Hoch often pressed me for an explanation of the odd behavior of the president's head. I was finally convinced that a neuromuscular explanation was incorrect when Paul Hoch handed me a copy of Thompson's book. When I showed my simple calculations to Paul Hoch, he said that no one would believe my conclusions, including himself, unless we could demonstrate the retrograde motion of a rifle range. Paul Hoch said he wouldn't ask his fellow buffs to believe the first tests unless he had photographic evidence. It's a very nice student-advisor interaction. All right. Now, the second thing was where do the shots occur? And are they too close together? In fact, this analysis couldn't show if they're too close together or not. But it could show maybe that there was more than 3 shots, or it could show that, anyway, it could show, it's of interest to find out what you can from the film. So what we have here is frame numbers. It's from 170 up there, down, and then starting over and all to 335. It's frame numbers going down. So time is going down like that. And what's plotted sideways is differences of streak lengths from frame to frame. So let me explain that. Louis already know from taking motion pictures of his own that you can't hold a motion picture film perfectly, carefully. You can't track perfectly. And in fact, he did invent it, as already been discussed, camera stabilizers and binocular stabilizers. So what he looked at, one of the first things he looked at, this was the first problem he attacked, in fact, was what could he tell by looking at glare headlights, streaks, points or streaks in glare from light on shiny parts of the car. And Zapruder was a pretty good tracker of the car, the limousine. And points stayed points a lot of the time. So, but occasionally there were streaks. And Louis also knew that if there were loud noises, like a gunshot, that there's an involuntary neuromuscular response. It causes an oscillatory spasm. You can't hold still through that. And so he looked for not streaks. In fact, if you were going a little too fast, panning a little too fast am I running out of time? Yes. How much time? Stop. Okay. Okay, so he looked, so you could get streaks, but uniform streaks by just going a little too fast. So it's not streaks of the highlights, it's differences in the streaks from frame to frame, because that shows a difference. If you're jiggling, your hands are jiggling, the frames will change from frame to frame. So what's plotted here sideways is the difference of the streak length from frame to frame, the difference from one frame to the next. And if analysis is going to be any good, you had better see something at 313, and you do. Now that can't be attributed to the neuromuscular response. There's about 1/3 of a second delay. So this big stuff is the response to if this is correct, there is a response to the third gunshot. Louis attributed that little stuff to the shock wave of the bullet, which is the car is in the proper location with respect to Zapruder to get that kind of shock wave. So what he then did is look over here and determine from these waves where he thought, the best guess anyway, of where 2 other shots had come from. There are other things going on here. There's little stuff here. This seems kind of long. This he explains in another way, but I don't have time for that. So, and the last thing is, he had a clock he saw a man. There was, can I stop? Can I have 1 more minute? Okay. The third thing was, what was the frame rate setting? And there was no controversy about this because the 2 possible things were 18 frames a second and 48 frames a second. That's a ratio of 8/3. Either the car was traveling at 12 miles an hour, if it was 18 frames a second, or it was traveling 8/3, 32 miles an hour, if it was on the slow motion mode. But he found a clock in it. There's a man happens to be in 18 frames clapping in the background. And he claps 3.5 times in a second, which is a normal rate. If you multiply that up by 8/3, you're clapping 9 times a second, and you can't keep the amplitude, and you can't do that anyway. Louis tried with a metronome and couldn't do it. So anyway, what this was nothing new scientifically. What it was careful observation and tenacity at looking and looking and looking and finally finding solutions to these problems.